open this academic ceremony in which Nadine Mohamad will defend the academic thesis, dietary lifestyle practices of people who use drugs undergoing treatment of recovery in Lebanon. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Dear Prorector, members of the Corona, friends and colleagues, today I will present the methodology, main results, and conclusion of my dissertation, Dietary and Lifestyle Practices of People Who Use Drugs Undergoing Treatment for Recovery in Lebanon. What is substance use disorder? SUD is a disorder that is characterized by physiological, behavioral, and cognitive phenomena leading to the craving and the overwhelming desire to seek the drugs at all times. The most common types of drugs that are used on a daily basis and can lead to substance use disorder include cannabis, opiates, heroin, cocaine, tranquilizers, sedatives, amphetamines, in addition to the unsupervised use of pharmaceutical drugs. Having a look at the global picture, we see that the prevalence, patterns, and severity of drug use varies over the years and differs across countries. It's estimated that we have around 5.5% of the general population using more than one type of drugs daily, with 0.7% of them suffering from severe substance use disorder. To date, opiate remains the most harmful type of drugs, leading to fatal and infectious diseases. Cannabis are the most common type of drugs that are used, followed by amphetamines and pharmaceutical drugs. The problem of substance use is escalating worldwide, and it's expected in 2030, the year for the Sustainable Development Goals, we will have an 11% increase in substance use disorder. Looking at the Middle East and the North Africa region, we see that in 2020, it was estimated that the people who inject drugs are around 1 million. The most common types of drugs that are used in the region include cannabis, opiates, heroin, cocaine, in addition to the amphetamines and the pharmaceutical drugs. Having a closer look at Lebanon, we see that the problem of substance use disorder is escalating, and there was a progression of substance use from the militias during the Civil War into the general population. What's really alarming is that we have an increase of use that is seen among the adolescents and the youth. Hence, we have an increased burden for treatment and the early detection of diseases that are associated with substance use. Unfortunately, we don't have an updated picture on the drug scene in the country. In 2010, it was estimated that the number of people who use drug ranges from 10,000 to 15,000, with 59% of them coming from heroin use. Opiates, cannabis, heroin, and cocaine are the most common types of drugs that are used among university students. We have an increased demand on the use of tranquilizers and sedatives among the Lebanese population in general and among adolescents in specific. The use of illicit drugs can have severe consequences on the individual and the society as well. It increases the burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases, mental illness, socioeconomic disadvantages, and low educational attainment and unemployment. Given this, the need for effective treatment is warranted. We have two types of treatments that are offered in the country and worldwide. First, rehabilitation, where the patient undergoes detoxification in a medical center, followed by 9 to 12 months of behavioral and psychosocial therapy in a residential center. The second type of treatment is the opiate substitution treatment, which is an ambulatory medication assistance program that aims for opiate dependencies, and the patient is given an opiate agonist like methadone or buprenorphine that decreases the craving and the overwhelming desire and withdrawal symptoms of street drugs. The problem lies in the scarcity of the research that is done among this population group. Most of the work in Lebanon specifically focuses on the prevalence of a specific drug in a specific segment of the population. Studies addressing the lifestyle practices and dietary intake of this population group in Lebanon and worldwide, up to our knowledge, are non-existing. So we aim to fill this literature gap and investigate the dietary intake, food addiction, nutrition knowledge, biochemical profile, physical activity, and sleep of people who use drug in both rehabilitation centers and opiate substitution treatment centers. Moreover, we investigated significant differences in these variables between the two treatment modalities, and we looked at the determinants of the weight gain that was seen. We collected several data and variables and parameters to develop manuscripts with an ultimate aim for the dissertation is to explore dietary and lifestyle practices of people who use drug treated for recovery in Lebanon and inform targeted intervention programs. After the review paper, we conducted two types of studies. The first one was a descriptive qualitative studies with focus group discussion, investigating the dietary and lifestyle practices of people who use drug in rehabilitation centers with perceived benefits and pitfalls. The second study was a cross-sectional study among people who use drug in both rehabilitation and opiate substitution treatment, where we looked and highlighted problematic area in these variables. All centers were approached. 3 out of 4 OST centers granted us permission for entry, and 4 out of 7 rehabilitation centers allowed us to enter. We collected several variables, demographic informations, biochemical parameters. We measured the blood pressure. We assessed the nutritional status using the subjective global assessment, the nutrition knowledge using the consumer-oriented nutrition knowledge questionnaire, the sleep quality using the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. We measured dietary intake by the 24-hour dietary recall, food addiction using the Yale Food Addiction Scale, and physical activity by the International Physical Activity Questionnaire. Our first paper, Nutritional Status and Eating Habits of People Who Use Drugs and or Undergoing Treatment for Recovery, a narrative review. We did a narrative review as there were several topics in this field with limited research under each topic. We wanted to have a comprehensive overview on the dietary, nutritional status of people who use drug and those who are in treatment. In general, during drug use, most of the patients have alteration in appetite with sweet preference. They have altered biochemical parameters, a decrease in the macro and micronutrient intake, and depleted serum micronutrient levels, in addition to decrease in weight and hence BMI as compared to non-users. This decrease in BMI was associated with several factors like the gender, the type of the drugs, the mode and the method of administration, the treatment, disease status, and the social and food insecurities. Once in treatment, we see improvement in the appetite, increases in the macronutrient intake, increases in weight, improvement in biochemical parameters, but the micronutrient intake levels remains below the recommended intakes. Our second paper, People Who Use Drugs in Rehabilitation, From Chaos to Discipline, Advantages and Pitfalls, a qualitative study. 7 focus group discussions were conducted among people who use drug in rehabilitation centers as they shared common settings and experiences. The moderator guided the discussion, tackling the daily routine in the centers, the causes for the drug use, the disrupted lifestyle in terms of sleep and meal patterns, the dietary preferences of the participants, and the relation or their experience with the weight gain that was seen, reaching the need to have a nutrition education program in these centers at the early stages of recovery and the best ways to administer it. The yield of the discussion can be summarized into 3 main themes, under which several sub-themes were identified. During drug use, the participants talked about the reasons and the consequences of their drug use, their chaotic lifestyle that was marked by decrease in appetite and disrupted lifestyle practices, reaching the reasons that motivated them to seek treatment. Once in treatment, we see that they have a structured lifestyle in terms of mealtime, sleeping hours, obligatory physical activity that was perceived as helpful for some but cumbersome for others, but all of them agreed on the peer and the professional support that was offered in these centers. And finally, our participants gave us some suggestions to make the rehabilitation treatment a better experience in terms of providing general nutrition knowledge at the early stages of the recovery, individualized nutrition consultation at later stages of the recovery, individualized physical activity program, and post-rehabilitation program to help them integrate better in the society and decrease the risk of relapse. Our third paper, Nutritional Parameters and Lifestyle Practices of People Who Use Drugs Undergoing Treatment for Recovery, a descriptive study. 369 people who use drugs in treatment centers were approached. 214 accepted to participate, and 187 met the inclusion criteria and were included in the study. In general, 88% of our sample were well-nourished based on the subjective global assessment. 66.8% had weight gain, and 20% had weight loss. Looking at dietary, some lifestyle practices among this population group, we see that around 50% of our sample had food addiction and low physical activity, and around 2/3 of them had poor quality sleep and poor nutrition knowledge. Moreover, we looked at significant differences in these variables between the 2 treatment modalities, and we see that the low physical activity was higher among the OST groups, whereas the weight gain and the poor sleep was higher in the rehabilitation centers. Moreover, looking at the weight change patterns among our sample in total and in each treatment modality alone, we see that those who were in the underweight, normal, and overweight category gained weight. Those who were obese pre-treatment in the OST center lost weight, while those in the rehabilitation centers continued to gain weight. Moreover, we looked at the BMI categorical changes pre and during treatment, and we see that those who were in the underweight category pre-treatment, 60% normalized their weight and 30% moved to the overweight category. Those who were in the normal weight category, 32.5% moved to the overweight category and 7.5% moved to the obese category. Those who were overweight, 31.6% moved to the obese category, and those who were obese pre-treatment, 20% moved to the overweight category and 8% normalized their weight. If we look at these BMI changes in each treatment modality alone, we see that the weight gain was more accentuated in the rehabilitation centers, and it was seen among those in the underweight, normal, and overweight categories, whereas the weight loss was more accentuated in the OST centers, and it was seen among those who were previously obese. As a step further, we looked at the determinants of these weight gain that was seen, and we saw a negative association with the duration of the current treatment, the number of the treatment attempts, and the pre-treatment BMI. So in summary, our findings revealed disrupted lifestyle and weight loss during substance use, weight gain during treatment, significant differences in different variables between the 2 treatment modalities, OST and rehabilitation, and association between the weight and the pre-treatment BMI and the duration of the current treatment and the number of treatment attempts. Yet, there are some methodological limitations in our dissertation that should be mentioned, like the low female representation, the reported and not measured parameters, the lack of a reference control group, and the lack of a baseline biochemical data to compare our results to. So, for policy making and program development in the future, longitudinal studies with a better representative sample in terms of size and gender are warranted, measured and not reported parameters, validation of these tools among this population group, and studying each treatment modality alone. Evidence-based health promotion intervention based on treatment modalities are warranted. Thank you. I will give back the word to the projector.
Thank you for your presentation. We will now move to discussing your research and your dissertation. And the opposition will be opened by Professor Stef Kremers, Professor of Health Promotion, Department of Health Promotion, and also the Chairman of the Assessment Committee. Professor Kremers.
Thank you. Dear candidate, let me start off by congratulating you on the work that you did. I think you did a remarkable job in doing this series of studies and describing them very nicely in your thesis, presenting them very clearly in the presentation that we just heard. And I think your achievement is even more special, considering the circumstances in which you had to do your research. Right? Not only in terms of the target population, which is a very difficult target population to do research in, but also regarding the societal context that doesn't help life in general and also working in general. So my congratulations for that. But I also took with me some questions. My questions reflect chapter 5. So actually the section where you ended your presentation. I would be very interested in discussing with you some choices you made there, and I'm just interested in the arguments that you have for that. Let me start off with a very short question regarding the way that you measured weight gain. Because there you, in chapter 5, you relied on self-reported weight in normal life, so to say. How reliable do you think those reports are?
Yes, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Actually, this was one of the drawbacks in our research, using reported and not measured parameters, not just in terms of weight, in terms of other variables at the same time. But regarding the weight gain, why we use the reported one? First of all, the drug use in Lebanon and in the region is a taboo. So really, getting access to people who use drugs, at least specifically in Lebanon, is impossible. The only way to have access to this population group is when they are in treatment centers. So going to treatment centers, the weight was so much an overlooked issue that they did not even measure the weight upon admission. So we had no choice but to rely on the reported weight that was given by the participants.
And do you believe what they indicated there? Do you believe, they said, okay, my normal weight is this and that? Do you feel it's a reliable measure?
To some point it is. Okay. To some point it is, because most of our findings were very much comparable with what we see in the literature. So, but again, this is one thing that we should address in the future in terms of taking the weight and other issues in the center, and not to overlook this due to the consequences of this weight gain that we will see later on all through the stages of the treatment.
I totally agree, and of course I'm totally with you that a longitudinal design with a measured weight at entering, and then a follow-up measure would be a better design, but I can totally follow you on those choices that you made there. Let me go on with asking you, I didn't really read it and I didn't really hear you say it, but what is actually, in your point of view, desirable in terms of weight gain? So what would be desirable as an outcome in terms of weight for you?
Yes. That's actually a very tricky thing to measure, because not all weight gain, even if in the normal BMI category, is healthy weight gain. I mean, there's the notion of overfed but being undernourished. And I think this applies to our population group, because we are not sure first that most of the weight gain is muscle mass and not fat mass. And if we look at the results that we find, that 40% of our samples had high percent fat mass in their bodies. Moreover, we cannot deny that we need to look at macronutrient intakes. Again, a big percent of our sample had the protein intake below the recommended dietary allowances. So this really emphasized on the fact that most of the weight gain was from the energy dense foods and not the nutrient dense foods. Moreover, there are some hidden deficiencies that we do not know anything about, and they can only be measured through some biochemical parameters like depleted serum micronutrient levels that we see. So
sorry to interrupt, but you know, this is how we like to discuss. So you're doing a great job, because you know, this is intriguing, because you're actually saying, you know, one person's weight gain is not the same as another person's weight gain. So there's nuance in there. You cannot just say weight gain is good or weight loss is good. Still, in your analysis, you apply this dichotomy.
Yes.
You said weight gain versus non-weight gain. You try to predict or post-dict that. And is that, so how does that relate then to each other? So you actually lost the nuance in the way that you made this dichotomy.
We lost the ones who lost weight?
Well, you actually said, okay, you just said, well, it's not such a clear picture to say weight gain is good or weight gain is bad, but still you said, okay, let's make this dichotomy, weight gain versus not weight gain.
Yes. Actually, if you look at the emerging evidence that we see in the literature, we see that the persons in substance use disorder treatment, they live to an age where the death is more from the non-communicable diseases as compared to communicable diseases. And weight gain is a major risk factor in the development of these non-communicable diseases. We cannot deny the fact that these 20% who lost weight should be overlooked. So definitely, in the future, we should address the people who lost weight in the centers, and we should really look at the determinants of the weight loss, because I'm sure there would be differences between the determinants for the weight loss and the determinants of the weight gain.
And what about those people that were underweight in their normal life, so to say, and then gained weight to get a normal weight? What about that group?
But this is what I'm just saying. We cannot say that this weight gain is normal weight, because we're not sure about the macronutrient intake levels, the hidden deficiencies. And again, the anthropometric measurements are not the best way maybe to measure the nutritional assessment of this population group. We need more validated tools for them. And again, what's very important is that we do not have nutrition requirements for this population group. So probably in the future, it would be interesting to set some nutritional guidelines for this population group to decrease the risk of weight gain, to decrease the risk of relapse again, and to improve the treatment and adherence to treatments.
Clear. Is there time for a very short question? We have to continue. Okay.
Thank you.
At the reception.
Thank you.
Opposition will be continued by Professor Pascal Samih, Professor of Epidemiology and Accreditation Leader, member of the Assessment Committee. Professor Pascal.
Yes, hello. Hello, Nadine. I would like to congratulate you on the work that you did. I really enjoyed reading your manuscript, and I guess that you did a great job. However, I still have some questions to ask you, because there are some clarification I would like to have. My first question will be about the samples that you had. Actually, how did you approach these institutions where you have people having treatment for their substance abuse disorder? Why these institutions, why not others? And how do you think this would affect your results?
Opponent, thank you for your question. Actually, it was very challenging to collect data among this group. What we did is that we approached all rehabilitation and all opiate substitution treatment centers in the country, but not all of them granted us permission to entry. So really we had to go for a more convenient sample. So all of those who granted us permission for entry, we went there and we asked permission for all those who are eligible to participate in our study. The centers really had to specify participants who were mentally and physically stable to be included in the studies. And among those who accepted to participate and met the inclusion criteria were included in our study.
Okay, so how do you think this kind of high refusal rate among institutions and also the restriction of the sample within the institution, how do you think this would affect your result? And what would you suggest in order to improve that point?
Yes, actually, one of the limitation is the small sample size that we had among our participants. But if we look at the findings of our results, we see that even though we have dearth of studies in the literature tackling some of the anthropometric and dietary lifestyle practices, we see that our findings are in a way comparable to what we see in the literature. But yet, we cannot confirm that, that we can generalize or that these findings need not to be addressed further by having a larger sample size and more random sampling among the population. But this was like an exploratory study in the country because we were the first to research on this topic and on this population group. So this could be the base for further future studies with larger sample size, and maybe by just like raising the awareness now about the problem that we are facing and about this weight gain and increases the risk of the diseases later on, okay, through the ministries, through the academics, and through the NGOs, they will be more open to participating in future studies.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about your multivariable analysis. In fact, you did a logistic regression, as I saw, and what do you think about the application of this logistic regression on your relatively small sample size? Are you at ease with the variables that you included?
Actually, we did stepwise and enter methods. I cannot say that one is preferable on the other, but looking at the small sample size, just the stepwise method was more advised to be used. But again, the sample size might have an effect on the determinants that we saw, especially that most of the lifestyle practices that can lead to weight gain were not found to be associated with the weight gain that we saw. So for sure, a larger sample would probably yield the same results or different, but we have to investigate further in this issue.
Okay. Do you think that you could have omitted a certain number of variables? Because you chose the one that had a p-value of less than 0.2 in the bivariate analysis, and you include them in your multivariable analysis. So do you have something else to suggest? If you had to redo it, would you do it in another way?
I would probably in the future look at each treatment modality alone and look at the determinants of the weight gain. Because from our qualitative work, we saw significant differences between the two treatment modalities and even our quantitative work. So it would be advised to look at each treatment modality alone and look at the determinants of the weight gain in each center.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I have no more questions. All right.
Thank you, Professor Pascale. The opposition will be continued by Professor Hani Tamim, Professor of Medicine, Director of Biostatistics Units of the Clinical Research Institute at the Faculty of Medicine at the American University of Beirut. Professor Hani Tamim.
Thank you very much. Oh, I can hear myself. Thanks for the presentation. I have one question, basically, that I would like to follow up with what Dr. Pascal mentioned, mainly about the sample size, but more specifically about the female representation of your sample. So looking at your sample, it's mainly predominantly males. So my question to you is, how do you think this might have affected the results or the conclusions, and what might be the reason for that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Actually, yes, one of the limitations in our study was the low representation of the females in the sample. And this was mainly due to several factors. One of them, again, as I mentioned, that drug use is a taboo. So the only way to capture these people is in treatment centers. And the females approach treatment much less than the males due to several factors, like the stigma, fear of stigma, the fear of loss of custody, the fear of sexual harassment, and because the drug itself, the drug use itself is a taboo. So we had to rely on those who were in the treatment centers. Unfortunately, in our country, we have limited number of rehabilitation centers that can accommodate females. So out of the 7, only 1 rehabilitation centers accommodated females. We approached them, and those who met the inclusion criteria were included in the study. On the other hand, in the OST centers, they do accommodate females, but it was very difficult to convince them to participate in the study. Only 3 accepted to participate and were included. Now, if we look at the literature, historically speaking, most of the studies that were done on substance use disorder included males and not females. Until recently, we have emerging evidence on the significant differences in the correlates and the causes for the drug use between males and females. So now, more research is being done on this population group because they differ in the type of the drug that they use, the reason for the drug use, some biological responses, severity of medical consequences, and other factors. Now, looking at the dearth of studies that included females in the literature, we see only few measured specific anthropometric measurements and compared them to female non-users. And very, very few only measured some anthropometric measurements and compared them to male users. We ran the analysis twice in our data. The first time with the females included, and the second time we removed the females to see if there are some changes. Very few of the variables have changed, like in terms of the use of antidepressant drugs, the unemployment, the sleep behavior, among this. So we cannot really confirm that these are changed because we removed the females or they are gender specific due to the small sample size that we have. So it would be really interesting in the future to include more representative sample of the females and compare these results quantitatively. However, if we look at our qualitative data, we see significant differences between the males and females in terms of the weight gain, the drug use, and the reason of relapse. Most of the females, a lot of them, initiated drug use because of weight gain. And the weight gain that was seen was a major cause for relapse. So it would be very interesting in the future to go for more gender-specific research, looking at the determinants of the weight gain in order based on the gender.
Thank you for the response. So basically, when you did 2 sets of analyses, one by removing the females and one by including the females, you would be handling the males part rather than the overall population. And one of the objectives is to generalize your results to the whole population. So my second question to you is how would your results be generalizable to the population, which includes females? Do you think similar results might be found, or do you think some major differences might be found?
Again, as I said, our study was the first in the region and Lebanon to look at these dietary and lifestyle practices, and it was the first worldwide to look at significant differences between the two treatment modalities. Now, in general, looking at the treatment centers and the services that they give in terms of the pharmacological treatment, the behavioral modification, they are comparable with what we find in the literature as they provide evidence-based methods and guidelines to follow. Looking at the dearth of the studies and the data that's found in the literature, our findings are in a way comparable to other male representatives in other populations. What's add to it more, we see some comparability in terms of the metabolic risk factors. Our unpublished data showed a high percentage of metabolic syndrome among this population group that was comparable, again, with other populations in different countries. So it is plausible that we can generalize our data, but yet, in order to confirm this, we would need a larger sample size with more random sampling among this.
Perfect. Do I have time for one last question? No, I didn't hear. I'm sorry. Okay, now I can hear you.
Yes, you have
So
time.
do I have time?
You can have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one last question. Basically, I just want to ask about the obstacles that you might face or you might perceive facing in implementation of such an intervention program in the treatment centers. Throughout doing your study, did you anticipate any obstacles or issues or challenges that you might face for such?
Yes. Actually, whenever we apply science into clinical settings, we face lots of obstacles, not just in the implementation, starting by the data collection and the science itself. And it's worth mentioning that they were a very challenging group to collect data upon. They were sometimes aggressive. They refused to participate. We faced problems in blood sampling. Sometimes the needle by itself was a trigger for the reuse. So it was really challenging in terms of data collection to start with. Now, regarding the implementation, I would expect we would face major obstacles, starting by, first of all, increasing the awareness about the problem in among the participants, among their families, because from the qualitative data that we collected, most of the participants see this weight gain as a sign of health, as opposed to the weight loss that they have during substance use treatment. So it would be really difficult to try to convince them otherwise. So that's the first obstacle. The second one is to raise awareness, again, among the caregivers and among the administration. From our interviews with these people, we saw that they were not really ready, even if they are aware of the problem, they were not ready to address it because they were scared that most of these participants might refuse treatment or go to relapse because of the weight gain that they talked about. One thing also worth mentioning was the attitude of these caregivers and the administration in terms of some of the suggestions, like the individualized physical activity program. One of the reactions was, we're not a gym, okay, so they can just do what we have. So again, proper training, setting guidelines for treatment among these centers would be important. the most important obstacle is the raising of funds, especially in these socioeconomic crises that we have. Most of the work that is done in the country is the effort of academics and NGOs. We have limited input from the ministries, either the Ministry of Public Health or the Ministry of Social Affairs. So we have to rely on external funds. We do not have specialized people in the centers in terms of nutritionists or dietitians or in terms of physical activity providers. So that's another obstacle. But what I find the biggest obstacle that we're going to face is the differences in the treatment modalities. The rehabilitation, in terms of implementation of the program itself, the rehabilitation centers, they offer a kind of like a secure blanket to the participants. All of the intrinsic and extrinsic factors are under control, and whatever changes of behavior that needs to be implemented on these participants is a kind of the stress that arises from it is reduced by the professional and the peer support in these centers. So it would be the ideal setting for implementing any intervention program. Whereas if we look at the opiate substitution treatment, there are several extrinsic factors that can hinder our implementation. So we have to look more at—
Could you please summarize your answer?
At the engagement of the families and the environment triggers by themselves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hani Tamim. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Specht, Associate Professor of the Department of Family Medicine and member of the Assessment Committee. Dr. Specht.
Thank you. Dear candidate, also my compliments for your very nice work and your very clear presentation. I really feel sorry for the almost kids that are there. Average age was 33. Can you imagine that you have to start your life in such a way? So I really think you did an excellent job in paying attention to such a population. I want to discuss with you about chapter 5, about the association study, as I always called it. I find these type of studies a bit difficult, and I wonder if you feel with me on that, because we do many of these association studies. You see them all over. But what can we really do with these type of studies? We do the analysis, we gather the data, we do the analysis, we see some associations which we expected don't really work. Probably the reason to do these type of studies is to find clues for new interventions. But I see a big gap always with such an association study, and then in the end, we know what to do. I think you know what to do. I think if you would go to these centers or if you would advise policymakers, I think now in your mind you know very clearly this will work, this will not work, because you did so many studies, etc. But I feel this gap with the association study. Do you experience the same gap?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Yes, I feel the gap sometimes in our bivariate analysis, where some of the major lifestyle practices were not associated with the weight gain. That was a bit confusing to start with, but we cannot overlook this issue. Even if they were not associated with the weight gain, they are further associated with future physical and mental health of the individuals that should be taken into consideration. So even if we did not find a direct association, they still remain a very important component of the intervention program that we should address. And now,
but actually, that's actually my point also, because the associations that you do not find, still you don't believe, because you say, well, they should be associated. We don't find it, and that's a statistical issue or a methodological issue, but still you are not convinced. So your data is not really giving you an input on what is important or what is not important.
It has, in a way, because the determinants that we saw with the weight gain are very convincing. Looking at our qualitative data in terms of the duration of the current treatment and the number of treatment attempts, most of the participants at the early stages of recovery, they gained the weight because they're happy with it after the weight loss that they experienced during substance use disorder. But after reaching a certain weight and seeing that the weight gain is continuing, they stop and they say, okay, we're not happy anymore with this weight gain, and they start to look for ways in order to overcome this problem. So as you move on with the treatment and the duration of the treatment, that is a big association with the weight gain. Yeah. Moreover, the number of the previous treatment attempts, because they have been exposed to this problem in previous treatments, so they know what to expect in the following treatments. But again, as I said, our sample size was small, and we only did a cross-sectional studies, and we did not follow them longitudinally. So I would suggest, yes, for future, a bigger sample size just to confirm what we found, our findings, would be helpful. But again, I mentioned, even if these do not show association, they are important in terms of the problem that we are going to address, which is the increase in the non-communicable diseases among this population group. So even if there's not a direct association with these lifestyle practices and the weight gain, they should not be overlooked. And we see that...
Can I challenge you? Can you mention like 3 or 4 key elements that in your view should be in an intervention?
Key elements of our intervention program?
Yeah. So if you would advise these treatment centers,
yes,
what would be your 3 most important advice?
First of all, a general nutrition knowledge at the early stages, because they're not ready for major changes. Individualized nutrition consultation for those in need at later stages, and individualized physical activity programs. Because most of them, the participants, they saw what was offered as cumbersome and boring. Yeah. And it's very important to individualize based on the self-efficacy of the participants, on the duration that is needed, but still this needs further investigation in clinical settings in order to see the effect on the treatment and on the risk of relapse.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for a second question? Yes. I was wondering, your focus is very much on ultimately on weight gain. It was more like lifestyle, I guess, more in the beginning, and then you moved more towards weight gain in the end of the thesis. So I was wondering, and you had a difficulty finding rehabilitation centers to join you in the study. I was wondering, is it do everybody feel that weight is so important and lifestyle is so important for these individuals? And is it really the most important or a hugely important issue? Or is like mental health or sleep disturbances, or is other issues that are considered much more important? And could that also be a reason why the rehabilitation centers looked at your study and said, well, yeah, we could look at this, but actually, there are much more important things to consider. How do you look at that?
Actually, it's not just weight gain that we emphasized on. Yes, we looked at the determinants due to the relation of the weight gain with other non-communicable diseases. But again, as I mentioned, when we talk about intervention programs, all of the lifestyle practices should be factors in these interventions: the sleep, the physical activity, the food addiction that was seen, and the poor nutrition knowledge. And the new guidelines in the new millennium by the National Institute for Drug Abuse is to incorporate diet and physical activity to improve the physical and the mental health of the population of substance use disorder. And because they have seen that having a proper physical health by tackling all these lifestyle changes can improve the treatment adherence, can decrease the risk of relapse, and it can reflect post-treatment physical and mental health.
But what do the caregivers in the treatment centers, what do they think?
Do they think?
Do they agree with you, or do they experience
this was one of the obstacles that we're going to face, is to raise the awareness about the importance of these programs and their implication on the disease in the future.
So what do they see as more important challenges then?
What they look at the moment is only the pharmacological and the social and the behavioral modification, nothing else. So that's the challenging part in our work among this population group.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spicht. The opposition will be continued by Professor Crutzen, Professor of Behavioral Change and Technology, Department of Health Promotion, member of the Assessment Committee.
Thank you very much. Dear candidates, also my compliments. Very interesting thesis. You look at drug use, but also all related kind of behaviors. And then my colleague already referred to it within the social context of the Lebanon. So I think it's a very challenging web that you managed to navigate. I know you a little bit, so it's no surprise to me. I know you for your brightness and perseverance, so well done. A lot of compliments for your work. Let me start with the questions with, you already referred to it in your presentation, your summary before, and you mentioned the 3 most commonly used drugs are heroin, cocaine, and cannabis. And that's not only like at the population level, but also among the population or the sample that looks for treatment. That is also the 3 most commonly used drugs that I learned from your thesis. And then, for example, you look at binge eating as a result of the replacement of drugs with foods, like during treatment, in the early phases of treatment. But for example, we know that a side effect of cannabis before treatment is also engaging in binge eating. So I was wondering, that brought me to the question, like, during your work, did you experience any differences in terms of these behaviors, like nutrition, mainly I think, between those 3 different most commonly used drugs?
Okay. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Actually, it was beyond the scope of our study to look at the effect of each treatment, of each drug alone. So we were addressing substance use disorder in general. But again, one more thing is that most of our drug users in treatment had more than one type of drugs that they used. So it's not really either heroin or opiates or cannabis alone. Most of them use the 3 or even more during this. So it would be really difficult to classify them based on the type of drug that we use. And add to it, our sample size was really small, so I wouldn't know how the findings would be reflected in terms of if we classify them based on the drug use. But from what we look at in the literature, the different types of drugs, they do affect the weight and the behavior through affecting some neurotransmitters in a different way. For example, like the cocaine, in terms of the dopamine, serotonin, they inhibit reuptake, decrease the transporters, they increase the cocaine and amphetamine transcribed drugs. So they affect the BMI and the fat mass. Whereas if you look at heroin, we see that the method of administration affects more the BMI and the weight as compared to the cocaine. Amphetamines and methamphetamines were associated with some kind of obesity in some population. Cannabis, no significant relation or association with the weight gain. But in our sample, we cannot really classify them based on the drug use because, as I said, it is a multi-drug use among these populations.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. So you're well aware of the differences, but they were in your sample. Most of them were multi-drug uses. Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Then I want to go with you to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you already start actually by saying, and now I quote you, evidence-based model emphasizing on lifestyle behaviors for the treatment of drug use are still in its infancy. That's what you literally wrote. And that raised the question to me, like, do we actually need specific models for this target group or for certain behaviors?
Actually, in these treatment centers, looking at the triggers for addiction and how they come, most of them, they use the cognitive behavioral therapy. It's in place among these centers. Now, regarding our intervention program, actually that would need further research in order to find which behavioral model fits more our participants. I mean, the cognitive behavioral theory could work since already most of the staff are experienced with it and they use it. What can also work is some kind of motivational behavioral therapies that would increase the motivation for the individual themselves and intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, like for them to value more the components of the intervention program and the extrinsic motivation in terms of the support of the families, probably especially among the opiate substitution treatment, because we do have extrinsic factors that should not be overlooked. So several theories could apply, but this needs further research among this population group, and the best ways to apply it, the best time to apply it during the stages of the recovery at the same time.
Yeah, so if I then reinterpret that, you don't really mean it in its infancy. You actually mean that we shouldn't only use these cognitive theories, we need other elements added to that. So your ambition would not be to develop new theories.
We might, because there are no really theories to change the components of our intervention program that are applied. The only theories that are used is to direct them towards behavioral changes for seeking drugs, but no other behavioral modifications.
Okay, and what would be like a possible hypothesis that comes to mind then?
In terms of theories that we'd use, again, as I said, the cognitive behavioral theory or the self-determination theory is important. We can use it because it increases the motivation, and this is really needed, as we have said, in the opiate substitution treatment.
Yeah, but that would then still be like using an existing theory, but applying it to this problem.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very clear. Then I give the word back to the rector.
Thank you, Professor Crutzen. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Snyder, Assistant Professor, Department of Health Promotion.
Yes, thank
Dr.
you very
Snyder.
much. Yes, dear candidate, I would also like to express my compliments for your work. I will keep it short because a lot of compliments have been given and I would like to have some time for my question, but the shortness of the compliments is by no means linked to the respect I have for your work, because I think it's really valuable. I would like to take you to the future, because I think the claim that you make is that we need health promotion programs to focus on lifestyle factors. And I think in relation to the question of my colleague Dr. Specht, you mentioned it should focus on nutrition, physical activity, and sleep as main behaviors that need to be targeted. And I would like to focus on intervention mapping, because you introduced that in your chapter 1 as the approach that you take, and you also reflect on it in your impact paragraph, where you talk about, okay, we have some objectives already for step 2. And I know that you had some intervention mapping training yourself. So I would like to start with a short, well, it's a short question, but I hope the answer will be elaborate. Do you think at this point that step 2 is finished and that you can continue with step 3?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Actually, no, because again, as I said, we would like to go for further larger sample size.
Yes.
One, and because and studying each treatment modality alone, because the outcomes and the objectives for each treatment modality might be different. So this is very important. So I would say we have like a baseline data to start our future work in terms of studying each treatment center, each treatment modality, setting outcome objectives separately, and then moving as a step further for the program components and the implementation.
So then you say we need a bigger sample size. Are there also additional things you would like to measure? What type of information is missing to complete step 2?
The objectives?
Yes.
We would like to include more females.
Yes.
Okay, so gender difference would be also important, studying males alone, females alone.
Yeah, I don't want to break in the gender, but I'm not focusing on that, but you talk about dietary, physical activity, and sleep, which are important behaviors, but they're quite broad. What exact behaviors do you think we should target within those 3 main domains? What is it in nutrition behaviors? I know you're an expert in that. What type of behaviors do we need to target?
Well, actually, if you see, most of our samples, a big sample, have food addiction, meaning that they have increased use of sugar and fatty foods, which are empty calorie foods. And so we would like to emphasize on having more nutrient-dense and not energy-dense food. So that's our first thing that we should tackle. Moreover, it would be interesting if we can look at probably some supplementations that might affect the improve the nutrition and might affect some behaviors, like in terms of depression, anxiety, some like amino acids that can be supplemented, and they have proven to be good in mental illnesses. So we can look at these 2 specific things and the macronutrient level intakes at the same time.
And in what type of food-related practices would that be then? Is it in terms of the composition of the meals? Is it in terms of snacking? Is it in terms of...
Actually, it's in terms of both.
Yeah.
The composition of the meals, lots of the participants claim that they do not give healthy meals to start with, and a very large portion size. It was like an incentive for these patients. The centers, they can allow them to have as much as they want from the food. So the portion size is not controlled. The type of the meals are not healthy meals. And add to it, the snacks that are offered are again high energy dense food and not healthy snacks. So these three items, I think if they tackle, they can have a good impact on the nutritional status of these individuals in the centers.
Yeah, and of course you know a lot about nutrition. I can imagine that the same nuances for physical activity, and sleep is a complicated behavior in itself. You know that in step 2, the end product will be a logic model of change, where we have like the behaviors, all the specific behaviors, but also the important determinants. So the why. Why do people engage in these behaviors? Do you already know enough about that as well, or is that something that you're also trying to address?
Now, regarding the food intake, yes, we know that they engage in these behaviors and they increased in the energy-dense food as a replacement for the drugs, because they give the same reward in the brain. They activate the reward system in the brain just like the drugs. Moreover, what was also interesting is that they do it out of boredom because of the strict rules and regulations in the rehabilitation centers. They're not allowed to go out, they're not allowed to watch TV, they're not allowed to have phones, especially at the early stages of recovery. So the only thing that they can let this frustration is through the binge eating that they have. So that's why these steps, yes, they should be further investigated in order to improve these eating patterns among the individual. Now, regarding the physical activity, again, lots of them saw this as a boring. We do not have professional physical activity providers in the centers, and it's very important to tackle the self-efficacy, the type.
Nadine Mohamad, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return to this room.
Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of this positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor De Vries is authorized to confer upon you the academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
But before we do this, we have a vow to take, which is, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Well then, by the authority vested in us, by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Nadine Mohamad Samih Mahboub, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I will now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the Great Seal of our university. Well, of course, it's an honor. I'm the first to congratulate you, Dr. Mahboub. I'm very much impressed by the work, but also by the defense today. I'm really proud of you. You did very well. And I think, of course, we all know, politically, socially, economically, it has been a challenging period for Lebanon, but for you as well. The blast didn't help, more chaos even. But you survived. You were always cheerful and positive and responsive to all the remarks that we made. So I'm really impressed by that. And since you're so composed and structured, you're really similar to your supervisor, Annelies. And that's why she will now give the laudatio.
Dear Nadine, dear Dr. Nadine Samih Mahboub, Alf Mabruk. Congratulations on your achievement. It is my greatest honor to give you the laudatio today. Thank you, Professor De Vries, for giving me this honor. Nadine, today we celebrate you as a PhD graduate from Maastricht University, one of the top universities worldwide. It feels so good to celebrate another achievement of Lebanese women, including Dr. Haidar and myself, graduating from the same place. Emotions are high. I extend my congratulations to your husband, daughters, relatives, friends, and colleagues, who I am sure share the same feelings of pride. We are so proud of you, Nadine. Executing your research study among the compounded and multifold crises that hit our country is by itself an achievement that you should be commended on. Despite the very harsh physical, social, financial, and security circumstances that you were operating in, you managed to plan for the study, execute it, and publish your articles in high-impact journals. Your passion for the topic and your determination to reach your goals always remained solid as rock. On top of this, you managed to publish another 5 articles related to nutritional sciences. You achieved these goals alongside your full-time job and, above all, your commitment toward your husband, Nahed, and your 2 daughters, Tatiana and Naya. You are a superwoman indeed. Going back to your research project, since day one, you were so determined to work with people who use drugs. I recall your words. I want to work with a population where research is mostly needed, where our research can have practical implications to improve people's health and lives. You were so determined, despite knowing that working with such a vulnerable population poses numerous practical, and ethical challenges. You were also so determined to explore an overlooked aspect in their journey of treatment for recovery, namely dietary and lifestyle practices. This work was extremely challenging, given the particularities of your study population and the scarcity of international and local literature on the topic. But what was really impressive is the high level of ethics that you maintained throughout this project. Understanding the practices of people who use drugs in recovery is the first step in the path of developing effectively targeted strategies for health promotion. Hence, your review on their nutritional status and eating habits, your qualitative work exploring the advantages and pitfalls of rehabilitation, and your quantitative work on the nutritional parameters and lifestyle practices, and the patterns and determinants of weight gain in this population, provide vital information for healthcare policy and practice. Dr. Mahboub, you are a pioneer in this research field, and I really hope your work will progress, as you discuss in the impact paragraph of your thesis, with an appropriate primary intervention program to be implemented in treatment centers. My last words. Nadine, الحياة انتصار للأقوياء في نفوسهم. Life is lived truly by those strong in their souls. You are strong, Nadine. I wish you all the best in your personal, professional, and academic life. You are an added value to the scientific community and humanity. Thank you for this PhD journey that we took together, and let's keep building beautiful things.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Nadine Mahboub, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. You did a wonderful job today, and I wish you all success in the future in your academic career.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I hereby close this academic session.